would like to introduce my co-presenter, Julia Fisher. She is a Chinese medical practitioner and a licensed acupuncturist. And she is just like this little mama bear. I've seen her for myself, and the way that she works with people makes, in my experience, makes them feel nourished, seen, and really experienced in this beautiful way. And on top of that, she has this wealth of knowledge from these years of doing this work. So even though she uses the language of Chinese medicine, she is so well versed in the biochemistry and the science of these things, which is what made doing this presentation together an amazing fit and blend. So I am so grateful that I got to do this with her for tonight.
Thank you. And this is Andrea. Andrea is a brilliant nutritionist, and I've known that even before she started studying nutrition, because she started at Namaste as one of the office goddesses. Gosh, how long ago?
Like 5 years, I think, yeah. Or 4 years, maybe? 5 years. 5 years.
5 years ago, and I am not ashamed to say that there were a couple times when I was consulting her on people. She's so brilliant about so many things, and the fact that she chose nutrition is just absolutely perfect.
Thank you.
And we were talking about how fun it was to do a talk together because our disciplines just meld so well, especially the way we work together with them.
So for our presentation, we didn't put up a PowerPoint because at the end we're going to actually do a mindfulness-based exercise, and we wanted people to not be so much out here, but be able to be a little bit more in here when we get to that point. And our talk today is what we call the mindful palate, and we're looking at craving in particular. Because this is a really interesting phenomenon. I see it a lot, all the practitioners do, this way that when we're trying to change our diet, there's these things that come up for us called cravings, where we really want or desire certain foods. And we wanted to just do an exploration around mindfulness and cravings and how those interconnect and how we can use it for a deeper inquiry that doesn't need to be judgment-based. So in health, a lot of times we're raised with the bad and the good of food, and it's really polarized in that way. And I hear it all the time, because I have people come in and they'll talk to me about, well, I'm eating these foods, and oh, I'm sorry, these are the bad foods that I eat. These are the good foods. And because of that, a lot of times when we have cravings come up in us and we feel them, we feel the need to squash it down, because it's causing us to desire something that we feel is bad for us, or that could harm us or hurt us. So we push through it, we quench it, and we do all these different things to no longer feel this feeling of craving within ourselves. And because of this, if we succumb to our craving, if we actually eat the food or drink the thing, then it can cause us to feel all these emotions alongside it. Guilt, shame, blame, all of these things, even distress, anger, frustration, all from succumbing to this craving. And so our discussion and our inquiry was, how can we use craving not as this thing that we're trying to shove down within us, and either we overcome it or we succumb to it, and it's this force that's acting on us, but how do we use it instead as information to discover things beyond what foods our bodies might need nutritionally, but even what maybe our soul and what our heart and what our lifestyles are longing for. And using cravings as indicators for these deeper needs that we might not be aware of just in this kind of external force that it plays on us. So there's this quote called "Your relationship with food," or that says, "Your relationship with food is an exact mirror of your feelings about love, fear, anger, meaning, transformation, and yes, even God." And that's from Janine Roth from the book Women, Food, and God. And with that premise, we can begin to explore that cravings mean a lot more about even what we want in terms of food, but about what we need on these deeper, even kind of spiritual, emotional levels. And so we're going to talk tonight a lot about what that is, what we crave, why we crave it, and our patterns and preferences around food and what those teach us about ourselves. And so the modern definition of craving is actually a very strong desire for something, or an intense, urgent, or abnormal desire or longing. It is simply that. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just something that indicates us or connects us to our own desires.
And cravings are not just a modern phenomena either. We have been craving since we've been in existence. I mean, it's one of our basic means of survival, right? And back then, in the days of early Chinese medicine, in the primal days of the way our species developed, our cravings would likely be more about physiological need, though, right, than anything else. Like we fell deficient in something, and we needed that something to survive, and so we craved it. And that gave us the impetus to go out and get it and work really hard for it and nourish our bodies in order to be able to go long enough without it so that we can go get it again, right? And, a good example of that would be we go all winter on tree bark and, I don't know, bugs that they find in the logs, and come spring, that craving for green stuff and fresh stuff is insatiable. I mean, without it, we would probably die. And so we have actual recordings through drawings and writings of cravings going back at least 2,500 years in Chinese medicine, which is so cool because it shows us that this is not just a pathology of the modern age. This is something that we developed as human beings with and have been dealing with for our entire existence. And it's also a survival mechanism, which is a really important thing to remember. Just as in modern Western nutrition, cravings are seen as particular to a few different things in Chinese medicine. One might be your inherited constitution, so the stuff you brought with you from all your ancestral line, that can determine your body type and your physiology to a certain extent, which can then determine what you're most likely to crave. Also tied to one's emotional well-being and physical nutrient status, that we'll talk about as we go. When Chinese dietary theory was created about 2,500 years ago, the notions of vitamins, minerals, carbs, proteins, this and that didn't even exist. So the ancient Chinese described different foods and their nutrient status and the way they act on the body in more, I guess, in a way, simple, relatable terms. They talked about the thermal nature of food, which is how the food acts on a person's metabolism. They talked about the jing of the food, which is all the energy that the food brings with it from the way that it grew and the place that it grew from. They talked about where it grew. Was it grown on the shady side of the mountain or the sunny side of the mountain? All that goes into the nature of the food. And then they talked about the flavor of the food or the herb or the even animal product. And the flavor was very different from the taste. The flavor had to do with how does that food react with your body physiologically and with your metabolism. And so when we talk about these cravings that we're going to discuss in more detail, I just want to give a little nudge to thinking about the difference between how a food tastes and what the flavor of a food is. And so I'll get more into that in a bit. But the lack of a flavor in the diet, that would create a deficiency of some sort, which would then lead to a craving on some level. Too much of a flavor in a diet could also create an imbalance that could then create a craving or maybe an addiction, that sort of craving. And so the balance of flavors has always been really important in Chinese medicine, herbal and dietary theory, because it's fundamental to a balanced bodily system.
And we wanted to do this talk together because there are so many ways in which the language of Chinese medicine and the work that I do with nutrition and biochemistry, what we both do, is so important to an integral healing component. So you'll see that, because what we're going to do next is we're going to go through 4 categories outlined by this one author of things that can drive or proliferate cravings in the body. And we're going to look at a contemporary example and its Chinese medicine counterpart. So you can begin to see the ways that these perspectives really have created this beautiful language and conversation about how to approach the complexity of craving and nutrition and relationship in the body. And so those 4 categories were outlined by this woman named Alex Jamieson, who wrote this book called Women, Food, and Desire, another beautiful book that explores these connections. And the thing with these categories that I am going to say is that they're not meant to be comprehensive. The body is constantly using every little part. We talk about mind, body, and spirit, and emotion, but these are all interconnected, and we use these categories to help give us a lay of the map and to figure out what terrain we're in, but that's just what it is. It's a map, it's not the actual place. Just like if you look at a map of the Grand Canyon, and you go to the Grand Canyon on a Thursday in October in 1980, that's a very specific experience, and that's the same way in our bodies. So these categories are not comprehensive, but they are meant to just give us an idea to be able to talk about how these things can be generated, although they do work together. And you'll see even as we talk that it's kind of it's kind of impossible for us to fully separate out the physical, mental, all of these different things. So the 4 cravings that this woman, Alexandra Jamieson, identifies are bacterial cravings, nutritional cravings, physical cravings, and emotional cravings. So the bacterial cravings come from all the billions of little bugs that are in and on and all over our bodies. And when we have this dysbiosis in the gut, that can happen from a lot of stress in life, from a very sad diet, the standard American diet, or from eating a lot of sugar, high carbohydrates. It can happen from external pathogens like viruses or bacteria or any of these sorts of things. What can happen is it can cause your gut flora to become off and to lose its balance. And when this happens, it can communicate to the brain certain messages asking for things to proliferate certain bacterial strains that there are overgrowth. So we see this in the case of yeast overgrowth with Candida albicans, and people who have high Candida or know about it know that when you have this, it can actually cause you to crave sugar in order to keep that imbalance in play.
And in Chinese medicine, they refer to this, we refer to this too, but we refer to it in a different language. This microbial imbalance is oftentimes called spleen qi deficiency. And this spleen qi deficiency can manifest as immature or weak digestion. It can manifest as addictions to different foods. It can manifest as problems with stools and gas and the kind of SIBO type things that you hear about. And it's pretty much the same thing. We're talking about the identical thing, just with a Chinese medicine language.
And that second category is nutritional, a nutritional craving. And so this can come about from having an actual nutritional deficiency, where there's a void of something, and so the body's longing for certain foods in order to recoup those nutrients that are missing in the body. So this can happen. There could be a whole host of reasons for why this is craved, but one reason that women crave chocolate during their cycles is because it has a higher rate of magnesium, and that's a nutrient that can be depleted. We'll explain other reasons why chocolate can be craved as well, but those sorts of nutritional deficiencies can cause us to long for certain things.
Yeah, chocolate in Chinese medicine is considered to be a very natural craving for women when they start their menses or when they're about to start their menses, because of its bitter and downward moving and qi dispersing nature. And without going into all of that, basically it helps to encourage bleeding and to release a lot of inflammation as an herb. So another thing it does is it really warms the lower abdomen, which in Chinese medicine is why we would say it helps with cramping and things of that nature.
And then the third distinction she makes is the physical craving, which was a little funky. It was kind of her definition, but we went with it. And that is where there's someone who's craving movement, fun, or the natural biorhythms of life. So an example of this would be when someone goes into having the 2 p.m. slump in their body and they want to take a nap or have a siesta, or if you're up really late at night and you feel a craving because you're trying to keep yourself going against the desire to sleep or rest or come down from that. So instead you reach for something like caffeine in order to give yourself a hit of something, and that craving comes to keep sleep or rest or sitting at a desk when you want to move and trying to stuff yourself for that movement that wants to come from happening.
And caffeine in Chinese medicine is also considered to be a really potent stimulant, especially to the kidney and adrenal system. And in Chinese medicine, we talk about it stimulating and nourishing the kidney yang qi. So you could kind of think about that as the adrenal energy. And they also talk about how if you use too much of it, it depletes the very same energy.
And then the final one that she differentiates is emotional cravings. So emotional cravings are from this piece of, we often use food as a comfort food and to mitigate stressors. And so in this case, it's someone who's using food in such a way to either appease emotions or to deal with the neurochemistry that can be involved in emotional imbalances. And so one example of someone, and I've seen this recently, is someone who is like telling me like, I crave really crunchy foods. And as soon as we got on the phone, I said, are you angry right now? And they're like, I am furious. And I was like, okay, yeah, because a lot of times there's this common trend that there's something about that crunching down, the way that we're trying to crunch down on this thing that's frustrating, and that clenching of the jaw that represents that kind of, you know, when you see someone get angry and you see it get fiercely tight in that area. And so they're having a craving in order to have an expression of that emotion, maybe in a way that feels comfortable or safe or something like that.
And, you know, emotional health, our emotional health has a lot to do with these chemicals called neurotransmitters in our brain. And those crazy ancient Taoist Chinese had no idea about neurotransmitters, but they still describe emotional distress in a number of different ways, and they describe different foods and herbs that would relieve that and disperse that and change it into another feeling. And now we know, you know, thousands of years later, that biochemically what these herbs and foods do is they act on different neurotransmitters in the brain. So it's fascinating how the connections happen. Like if we go back to the PMS and chocolate example, we know in modern day that one of the reasons why we crave chocolate when we're on our menses or about to start is because it affects the serotonin and dopamine balance in our brain. Back 2,500 years ago when our ancestors were talking about cacao, they talk about how it disperses liver qi stagnation. And liver qi stagnation is what happens with PMS. That's how we describe PMS from a Chinese medicine perspective.
So we're now going to go into probably one main craving that many people have and explore some of the different dimensions of it in a little bit more depth. And so we chose the one that we most prominently see. So does anyone have ideas what this craving could be for? If it had a taste, or what kind of craving do you think people usually crave if they have a craving? Sweet?
Sugar.
Sweet, yeah, sugar, sweet. So, and this can come in a lot of different forms. So what are some of the, it doesn't have to be yours, it could just be someone's in the world, but what are some of the sweet cravings that are available to us, some of the sugary types of things? What kind of foods would those be?
Ice cream.
Chocolate, ice cream.
Soda.
Huh?
Soda.
What did you say?
Or just the amping up of the tea, you know, just more and more and more sugar added to things.
More sugar additives
More
like honey or
carbs, bread.
Yeah, so when people come in and they talk to me about the different things, it usually takes the form of either the breads, pastas, the crackers, potatoes form. So we don't typically think of that as like sugar sweet, but it converts in such a way that it has that reaction in the body. And or like the baked goods sweet, the cookies, that was my jam growing up, right? That was like, give me a good cookie. That was my thing. Still probably is. So cookies, cakes, cupcakes. Then there's the kind of the pure sugar sweeteners, the honey, the candy, the soda, the agave, used liberally on a lot of different things. And then the kind of last one is fruit, even. A lot of people are like, oh, I don't eat sugar, but I eat pounds of fruit. And you're like, well, that's a lot of sugar. In a different form. And so these are the typical ones. And when we eat these foods, these things that we consider to be sweet foods, they can have a whole host of things that can cause imbalances in a lot of different ways.
And all those things that you guys mentioned were sweet tasting foods. So I want to make sure, as we keep coming back to this idea that the sweet flavor, that the salty flavor, that the spicy flavor can be used medicinally to actually heal the body, that we understand the difference between these things that taste sweet and these things that have a sweet flavor. So all these things you mentioned that taste sweet, some of them also have, well, all of them also have a sweet flavor. But when you think of tasting sweet, what you can think of is an incredibly intense and potent sweet medicine. And so that can be the difference between a sweet flavored food and a sweet tasting food. So one example of that is white cane sugar. And cane sugar is used as an extremely potent medicine in Chinese medicine. It's used to stop serious spasmodic lower abdominal pain. It was shown in drawings back in ancient China as being used on the battlefields of different battles, and also during labor to get rid of labor pains. And it has a lot of potentially toxic side effects if used in excess, or if used by the wrong person, or in the wrong situation, or in the wrong form. So that is probably the most potent sweet herb that we have in Chinese medicine. And that includes, white and brown sugars. A lot of brown sugars are just sugar with brown sugar added to it, with molasses added to it, and things like that. And it also includes some fruits. Some fruits are so high in sugar that they are a very potent medicine and should be regarded that way. Then there's the sweet flavor. And this is another way to look at sweet that you can start looking at as bringing into your life to heal different aspects of your body, but also your mind. And that's because the sweet flavor is said to fortify the whole body. It's said to fortify all the different parts of the body, the yin, the yang, the qi, and the blood. And it also relaxes spasms and tension. So it's not just white sugar that does that, but sweet in general helps with pain and tension. And it harmonizes the effects of other flavors. So a lot of times we'll use a sweet herb like black licorice in an herbal formula because it helps all those herbs work together a little bit better in the body. It also makes it more accessible to the body. It makes a bitter herb more accessible to the body. And it nourishes the spleen. Remember, spleen, qi deficiency, and its connections, which in Chinese medicine are seen as the stomach, the mouth, the muscles, and the lips. So in just enough, it can be really good for a weak gut. Too much, it can be really harmful. So that's the sweet flavor. And you find the sweet flavor not just in carbohydrate-rich breads and muffins and things and fruits and different sweetened stuff, but also in all the root vegetables. They're all considered, most of them, are considered sweet-flavored foods. Chicken is considered a sweet-flavored food in Chinese medicine. Bone broth of all different kinds is considered sweet. I mentioned black licorice. Rice and other grains and dairy products are all considered to be sweet-natured foods.
And to that, to that piece of there being this beneficial piece, glucose, sugar in the form of glucose, it is necessary for certain cellular metabolic functions that are going on in our bodies. And so often it's used, and this is very potent medicine that's used in such a way that it throws it out of balance in a way that we see the toxicity and the effects of it in this detrimental process. And sometimes a craving for sugar can be so many different things. It can be blood sugar dysregulation. It can be because we've had too little sleep. It's because we could have had too little exercise. It could be because we haven't had enough protein. It can be because we have a nutritional deficiency in magnesium, chromium, or zinc. And it can be because we're eating a lot of processed foods, refined sugar, starchy carbohydrates. So there's a lot of different factors that can drive it. And then that microbial influence is a big piece. One of the things that I see all the time is one of the best ways to curb carb cravings, that's like I should do that all the time, curb carb cravings, is to introduce people to things that help their microbiome and the flora of their gut to be balanced. And just doing that can help people to stop having certain cravings. And then finally, from this kind of other lens, emotionally, sugar can be craved when we need a hit of happy in our lives. It can be something that, because of what it does for the pleasure-inducing serotonin in our brain, it can be used to mask painful or sad emotions that we may have. It can also be for the person experiencing the mundane, day-to-day pieces in their life, all work, no play. Sugar can offer that burst of joy to make it through. And additionally, high tension can actually push us to crave carbohydrate-based sweets like muffins, cookies, because when we're tense, we produce more cortisol, and this stimulates a chemical in our brain called neuropeptide Y, which in turn can regulate our carb cravings and make them come on or off. It's a kind of simplified version of what's happening, but it's doing that.
So why do we crave sweets from a Chinese medicine perspective? We kind of went into this, but just a little bit deeper. Sweet fortifies, it tonifies the whole system. So kids have craved sweet, and since the beginning of time, they'll crave it until, whatever happens to this world and we're all gone. And that's because they grow so fast that their little brains that are growing bigger by the moment and their bodies that grow so fast have a much greater need for sugar than an adult's. So that's one reason. We also used to really work very hard for our sweet flavors. The amount of effort required to get just a little sweetness in our lives was really immense. So immense that we'd get it, we'd hold on to it, and the minute we had energy, we'd try to go out and get it again to get us through the lean times. And of course, when some of us are pregnant and nursing, we crave sweet. We're growing ourselves, and we're also growing this little being inside of us. So sweet is much more of a need than just in day-to-day life. Sweet also relieves emotional stress that we talked about, and sweet soothes the spasms and relieves the pain. But why do we crave sweet now? Well, for all the same reasons: the growth, the stamina, the brain power, the pain relief, and all of that. But there's some difference, right? We don't have to work for sweet anymore. In fact, the least money we have, the more we can get sweet, right? Sweet is the cheapest flavor out there. The most plentiful supply of that sweet flavor is the sweet tasting part of that. The most potent and possibly toxic parts of that sweet flavor are the easiest to get for the masses. We don't think of it as a medicine that demands respect and requires a little bit of careful use. And we take so much in on a day-to-day basis that we create these addictions in our brain. And so they don't tend to happen, and in our gut, those little microbes. Those addictions don't tend to happen if you don't have constant supply. And then another thing to point out is that this sweet addiction isn't just a modern phenomenon either. It is recorded in Chinese medicine back when royalty could start producing sugarcane themselves. So when they when they had the ability to grow, make other people grow, and process sugarcane, that's when these sugar addictions started showing up, and that's when diabetes started showing up. We have records of diabetes, over 1,000 years ago, and it was a disease of the royalty. Abundance led to overindulgence, led to disease. Well, now, diabetes is the 6th largest killer in America. And the amount of children with diabetes has raised so significantly since 2000 that it's appalling. And it's more than there's ever been in our history of human beings right now. And so it went from being a disease of the royalty and the gluttonous to a disease of the masses. So I think we really do need to change our idea of how we use sweet and sugar. But once we decide to do that, and once we decide why we're craving sweet, then there's a number of different ways to approach that, how to bring that sweetness into your life without reaching for the sugar. And Andrea is going to talk more about the mental emotional aspects of that, but there's a few different foods and herbs you can use. And one example would be something we all have in our spice cupboard, which is actually my favorite herb in the entire medicinary, I think, and that's cinnamon. Cinnamon has a sweet and spicy nature, so functionally on the body, it acts in a sweet and spicy way, and it is also very warming. So it brings a lot of nourishment with the sweet flavor. It brings a lot of dispersing of stagnation with the spicy flavor, and it brings a lot of warmth to the whole system, moving the metabolism and creating a lot of wonderful circulation in the body with its warmth, thermal nature. It's amazing for lower abdominal pain, especially of a cold nature. So women who cramp before menses, again, if the blood is kind of dark and clotted and the belly is cold, gosh, cinnamon's the first herb that I reach for. It's absolutely wonderful. Beef bone broth or chicken bone broth or fish bone broth or lamb bone broth is another. It's a food you can use to bring that sweet nature into healing. Bone broth is considered to be warming again and sweet, so it tonifies and fortifies the whole body, and especially the tissues of the intestines and the lungs and the brain. And it also warms, so there's lots of good circulation and metabolism encouraged when you eat bone broth. And then it also is salty, which from a Chinese medicine perspective doesn't just mean a bunch of sodium chloride. It means all the salts and all the minerals. So it really fortifies the blood, which is made of minerals and salts, and it boosts the immune system as well. So it's one of the best things you could reach for while you're recovering from any sort of long-term illness, especially for kiddos. It's amazing, and that's a real way to bring sweet and salty into your life in a very healing way.
I think you can tell from hearing Julia talk about it that she talked about bone broth as a sweet flavor and cinnamon as a sweet flavor. So it wasn't like cupcakes or any of these things. That there's these foods that really, when we start to adjust our relationship to them, we actually gain the sweetness from them. And it's similar to that in life. I had this experience where I was constantly craving sweet. And by experience, it'd be multiple experiences throughout my entire life, where I would have this craving for sweet. And I remember I hit one period of time where I was like, okay, what is it like? Instead of me just trying to be like, don't eat it, instead, what would it be like for me to have this inquiry, this deeper inquiry of why it is that I'm craving this sweet thing? And we're going to do an exercise like this with our craving, but when I sat with myself, I realized that I wanted that life, everything, like the joy of life, the sweetness of life wasn't feeling kind for me. It felt separate from me, like the kindness of the world somehow was outside of me, and somehow everything was hard and gritty, and that by eating something sweet, I was taking the sweetness of the world and I was putting it inside of me. And the way that I got through my cravings was actually through this mantra, where when I felt like I wanted to eat this sweet thing, I would just say, the sweetness already exists in me. The sweetness exists in me. And when I acknowledged that, and when I kept acknowledging that and kept feeling the truth of that, then it changed some of the activities that I did in life because I realized what nourished that sweetness within me and what didn't. And this is something that I've had to continually do throughout my life with different foods and in different ways. But there's this way that when I started to have this inquiry, it opened me up to realizing that I needed to have moments of joy. I needed to have moments of play. I needed to have moments that inspired that within me and brought me into touch with that. And for all of us, that looks different. That can be, for me, it was doing parkour and jumping around on a playground like a 5-year-old and a 29-year-old, apparently. And it was also going for walks outside and listening to music and participating in the arts. These things that allowed me to feel the parts within myself that know what sweetness is and know how to offer that to myself, by myself and in connection to other. Because we have another craving we could talk about, but for the sake of time, we're actually just going to move into this. And, do you want to?
I'll say it after.
Okay, cool. So essentially, for this little exercise, what we're going to have all of you do in this room is have you, and I'll explain what the process is and then I'll lead you through it. Essentially, it's one of mindfulness. For me, it helps when I'm in a room to close my eyes. You don't have to close your eyes. But the idea is that we get mindful about where we are in the moment, feeling our bodies, what we feel in this very, very moment. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bring to mind something that we crave, either something that we crave in the moment, something that we've craved in the past, and then we're going to do a little exploration of that in the moment, noticing how it is for us to do this right here, right now. And then we do this thing where we allow for deep listening. So this is more than just the words that go on in our head, but it's the sensations that we feel. It's the things that arise. It can be emotions even. It can be things without words. It can be pictures. There are a lot of things that can arise when we just are within ourselves, noticing those things. And as silly as it sounds, there's this way that being in the present moment with all of the experiences that are there gives us an opportunity to notice what is. And that's the thing, to just notice what's there. And try to not have the judgment of, oh, I shouldn't want this or I shouldn't feel this, if you can. And that might be there too, and then just notice it. And to just notice what's there, to get information. So, to start, if all of you here can just get into a comfortable position, you can keep your eyes open, closed, whatever you feel comfortable. And then just feel your sit bones in your seat, your feet on the floor. Feel the weight of your body in its chair. Feel your breath come in and your breath move out. You're here in this room, feeling your sit bones sink. And then as you're here, just bring forward something that you crave. It can be right now. It could be something you usually crave. And just notice it. What it looks like. If it has a certain texture. If it's cold or if it's hot. If you're in a certain place with this food, or maybe you just see the food. And then noticing that if you taste this food, if you can, what it tastes like. happens in your body. Noticing what it's like to notice this thing. Do you notice it in your head? In your chest? In your heart? In your feet? In your gut? Or nowhere at all? Do you hear anything while you're with this food? Do you say anything? Or maybe there's nothing. Then notice how it is to fully have this food, this thing, to fully have your craving. Are there any emotions there? Colors? Any feelings? Now notice finishing this food and how it feels after. And just take a moment, come back to the room, slowly and in your own time. So did anyone have a food that they want to share or an experience of that food they want to share? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at first, I was thinking about the food. And then I thought there's something more I craved, and that's health and peace and love and joy, which gave me a lot more craving for than the food. Because when you eat the food, then the craving is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have health and love and happiness in your life, that's going to be forever.
For a lot longer.
Well said, Jean.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And it speaks to, and some people, I mean, this time as I was feeling into it, probably because I was talking, it was really hard for me to connect to that thing. So sometimes it can be hard to connect to anything, especially when you're in your head that way, or in your body not having it in front of you. But it's something that you can do even when you're with the food. One time when I did this, I saw my glorious cookies, and I remember when I saw them, it was so bizarre because it just had like gold streaming off of them, and I was like, whoa, I'm a little glorified. Yeah, it was like, woo, cookie. And I remember when I ate it, what was interesting is I didn't actually eat it in real life, but when I ate it, I felt all the emotions well up within me that I associate with that. And I immediately felt peaceful and calm, but I only felt it from here up. And so it was just an interesting thing.
Did anybody have any sort of part of their body light up like that when they thought of their food? No?
Any other experiences? Thank you.
I know that when I think about those little chocolate almond butter Mary tart things, I love those so much. And that's the one I was envisioning, and I know I'm a Chinese medicine nerd, so this is probably why it happened, but the spleen meridian just lit up everywhere. And you're like, oh, yes, nourish my spleen. Nourish. Yeah.
That's our talk.